from one great group of people to another one, I'd like to introduce you to our great panelists for today, so that we can kick off our roundtable with some interesting question. Starting from David Connolly. David is the New Frontiers program manager in Dundalk Institute of Technology and Dublin City University. Thanks a lot, David, for being here today. I think you're in the US, so even more thanks for being here. Gavan Drohan. Gavan is the head of entrepreneurship at Tangent, Trinity's idea workspace in Trinity College, Dublin. Thanks a lot, Gavan, for being here as well. Martina Mendola. Martina is a researcher at the Human Sciences Studio at Accenture, the Dock in Dublin again. And the last one, Michael. Unfortunately, Michael couldn't be here. Michael Brougham couldn't be here today with us answering the question. Michael is the regional director at Enterprise Ireland for Mideast and Midlands regions. We thank him for engaging with us, and we're sorry not to have him here answering our hopefully interesting question. But not to worry about that, because as I said, we have some other great panelists. So I will invite them on the stage, and I will start asking them a few questions, if they don't mind. David, you can you just give me a okay, I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So we will follow the order. Basically, we follow the order you saw on the slides, and we can just kick off with the first question for David. So David, the first question I would like to ask you is regarding the results that we presented today. How do you make sense of these results, and what is your take on the data that you've seen today? And so what do you think in general of the Irish ecosystem?
Yeah, I might just actually start with a compliment to you in terms of the work that you've done. I think we've over and back probably for the last 9 months in terms of chit chats, little pieces of information in terms of people that I should say you should talk to. I was late with that information because you'd already done it. So you've done an exceptional amount of work, and that's obviously to the fore in terms of the report that you've put through. For me, I think the interesting was a couple of pieces, but the most interesting thing was that stagnation that we discussed in terms of over the last 3 to 4 years. Obviously, driving into it's probably something to do with COVID or people leaving that sector. For me, I think from a very baseline of something that I'd be very interested in was that initial detailed mapping piece that you've completed in terms of the incubators. I wasn't aware that the number was as high as that, which is kind of probably to detriment to me, based on working in the community and the startup ecosystem for the last 10 years or so. I think it was interesting to notice the number of private entities that were out there. I think it was 36%, I think was the figure. For me, that was actually quite surprising. I wasn't aware of that. Interesting to note that when you have private entities, semi-state entities, and fully fledged kind of government bodies that are obtaining funding from government institutions like Enterprise Ireland or wherever it may be, that rent seems to be the biggest source of income. And that's something that's I know from incubator tenants that we have, it's an ongoing conversation, maybe a challenge for them in terms of meeting those costs, but it's just an interesting one. Yeah, so look, I'm looking forward to chatting. So yeah, they're a couple of whistle-stop tour pieces for me.
Perfect. Thanks, David. And I want to minimize the amount of word that I'm saying because I want to leave the floor to you. So I'll move on to Gavan quickly enough. Same question goes for you, Gavan. What's your take?
Thanks, Massimiliano. Just to echo what David said, congratulations on putting the report together. There's a lot of really interesting sort of data in there. And I agree that the terms incubator and accelerator, they're so interchangeable, like even within my role in Tangent, like we're not even a typical university model. We deal with with student startups right through to external pan-European startups that are funded through EU. So we're incubators and we're accelerators, and we're even totally different than your typical university model of research spin out. So it is a confusing sort of space. I think one of the things that stood out to me was the but 43% located in Dublin. So it's interesting, not really surprising, but I think that's something that in the future, where things like Enterprise Ireland from a regional perspective is something that should be looked at. You know, if you look at sort of Dogpatch and what they're doing through the NDRC program, they've been doing a lot of work in trying to build that national sort of network, you know, bringing in sort of, you know, Portishead in Galway and RDI Hub in Clorglan and sort of Republic of Work. And I think we definitely need to see more of that, because I think it's something post-COVID as well, where we see a lot of migration out of the cities for people working remotely as they look to maybe sort of, you know, create their own sort of startups. I think those regional supports will be particularly sort of important. You know, like Enterprise Ireland do a fantastic job in terms of sort of, you know, seeding investment into sort of that stage, but in terms of how we can fund the sort of the expansion of more in incubation centers, co-working spaces, and again looking at, well, what is the sort of the model there in terms of sort of, you know, are rent subsidized? You know, it's definitely something worth investigating.
Thank you so much, Gavan, for that. That's really interesting. And you mentioned Dogpatch, so we can see that the regional connections are growing, but still needs to be improved. So I will quickly move then to you, Martina, to give us your opinion on what you've seen.
Thank you, Massimiliano. First of all, I'll say a couple of words about why I'm here and what's my role. I am a researcher in the Human Sciences Studio at Accenture, the DOC, which is the Global Innovation Center for Accenture. So I think what I'll try to do is talk about the Irish ecosystem, but also kind of with a global perspective, because being such a big company as Accenture is, it is really innovation. It's all across an ecosystem that it's worldwide. And so it's nice to see how things in Ireland go compared to other places in the world. And personally, I think, first of all, the report was great. I didn't know. And I'm also a previous student alumni of Tangent. I did the innovation and entrepreneurship course a few years ago. So it's nice to see, you know, everything coming full circle for me. But what I see is that I was surprised, but then I realized it shouldn't be surprising, because if you think of Ireland, it's really in a unique position, and not just because of, you know, tax reliefs that has given in the past to attract, you know, companies in here. But, you know, Ireland is a growing economy, which is not something you can say for many economies in the world and in Europe. It has a lot of talent, right? It is attracting really top talent from all over the world because of this. And because it's expanding, you know, so fastly, there are a lot of problems. And you know better than I do that when problems are there, that's innovation, right? Needs to happen. It's really a fertile ground for startups to be there and for incubators and accelerators to actually work with startups to face those challenges. So if you think of, like, again, the big companies and tech companies that are located in Ireland, we host a large number of data centers, which are creating CO2 emissions, and it's hindering Irish, you know, the government resilience to actually meet the targets that we have in terms of carbon emissions. So again, big innovation is going to be needed there. There is huge potential to actually counterbalance all these different forces. So to me, I think I'd say I am happy to see that there's so much innovation happening right now in Ireland. I think this is a perfect place. And I think that it's a matter of really helping, you know, those startups to scale and doing more accelerator work. Because again, it's really a special place to be right now for innovation, I feel.
That's great. Thanks, Martina, for this holistic kind of view. That was really interesting. If you don't mind, I will move then to the second questions, because I want to be asking you, because it's so interesting, I want to be asking you as many as I can. And I'll go back to David again. David, is there something specific that you think could be done by incubators and accelerators on one side, or policymakers, I would say, on the others, to kind of improve the whole ecosystem? In other words, is there a specific challenge you feel should be addressed, or is being addressed maybe not in the best way and should be solved for the future?
That's a loaded question. Yeah, look, I suppose firstly, I'd echo what Martina said in terms of Ireland being a fantastic place in terms of innovation and setting up your business. I think Enterprise Ireland has cultivated a lot of that. Initially acting as the agitator for supporting, for example, ourselves. So I'm based in a kind of a regional government funded or Enterprise Ireland funded program. So that's the first piece. I think that's been created. And it's been built upon, and that's why I mentioned about the corporate piece. It's interesting to see that flowing in afterwards, and Accenture, Doc, and all of that coming, which is fantastic because it creates a competitive nature between the incumbent and those that are entering the market, which is only good or is only a positive for people that are looking to obtain these supports and facilities. And look, very often when you're in that early stage incubator or incubation phase, it's those connections that you're having. It's those interactions with people that are positive or somebody that's 6 months down the line. So I think that's a very positive thing. So I'm going to start with the positive piece and then maybe move into opportunity. We call it opportunities maybe for opportunities for improvement. Maybe let's put it like that. We'll mark it as a B+. How about that? Yeah. Look, for me, I think one of the interesting things was I think it was section 5 and 6 that you mentioned there, that there was the less likelihood for incubation tenants to look for, and it was around legal and administration. And I suppose entrepreneurs can be creative in their nature, and they're probably so busy focusing on the front end that maybe the back end just isn't built up or has to be built up over time with that structure that comes from a large organization, or scaling a large organization. But one that stood out for me was the next point on that around IP and intellectual property support. And why I'm teasing that one out is if you look at what's receiving investment as a company scale, so you're talking your pre-seed, your Series A, or whatever it may be, very often you're looking at where the kind of intellectual property is coming from, and that investment then that's derived from it. So that for me is probably something that I'd be looking at. Maybe we could put some sort of a weighted piece on that. How would you do it, or how would you administer that from a practical viewpoint? Maybe you're teasing those companies out before they enroll in that incubation space to say, like, could we do an innovation or a IP audit on what they're looking to do? So that's just one area that I'd look at, and it's one that I'm particularly interested in.
Thank you, David. It was really interesting again. And I'll pass the floor over to you, Gavan, if you want to build on what David says. What's the most present kind of challenge that needs to be solved at the moment?
Yeah, like I'd agree with a lot of what David is sort of saying there, and programs like New Frontiers and or programs like that are doing a great job in terms of just building up that knowledge set within sort of the founders at the early stage. I would go back sort of to the regional supports and to making sure that things are not too Dublin centric. And again, I know New Frontiers and that are run nationally. So how do we stimulate more sort of even co-working spaces? When from in past working sort of on accelerators, one of the real benefits that a lot of the entrepreneurs got was from speaking with the generation that have gone before and getting those sort of founder stories, particularly sort of the mistakes they made. I found it, like I previously was involved in running a sort of a corporate accelerator, and we were one of a number sort of globally. And one of the unique things in Ireland is the Irish founders loved coming in and talking to the new early founders in terms of about their journey and sort of the mistakes they made, and they were never shy about telling sort of the mistakes. And there's a huge amount of learning from that. So how do we harness that network of knowledge and experience and pass that sort of information and skills down sort of to the generation that's sort of coming through? I think that's sort of key. And again, sort of doing this on a regional basis and not just harness the sort of technologies that's available. Like we do a lot of our programs sort of virtually as well now, which is great. It supports it's very difficult to make that jump from being in a corporate career to make that leap. Okay, I want to do a startup, and how do we sort of support people in that sort of interim sort of thing, sort of harnessing technology, run programs sort of virtually. A number of years ago, so within Tangent, there was a report from UCC which showed sort of what areas would be sort of impacted by sort of changes in AI and sort of an automation and technology. And we took that report, that's great. So we started running sort of programs regionally in a lot of those sort of centers that were going to be impacted, and they were massively oversubscribed. So there is an appetite out there, particularly when we go through booms and recessions, and inevitably another one will sort of come, and people will want sort of to maybe look at creating their own sort of startups. So, what are the tools and things that we can provide there? I think that's going to be key. And like I said, Enterprise Ireland are doing sort of great things, and the local enterprise office as well. And it's just, but I think there's just needs to be a little bit more sort of joined up sort of thinking as well. And I'm thinking particularly as well around sort of seed funding at that early stage. I think there's a lot of support for Enterprise Ireland when you get to a certain stage. You do sort of competitive start fund and into sort of HPSU. One of the challenges that we have supporting student startups is, we're dependent on philanthropy and sort of donations from that. They're nearly too early for Enterprise Ireland, and it's how do you support startups right at that beginning of their journey? That's that's one that we'd love to be able to fix. That's from a selfish perspective,
Thank you, Gavan. That's again very interesting, and I can only underline what I liked when you said it's very important to kind of be joined together and having the chance to access that network of knowledge of people who made mistakes in the past and learn from them. And I see it every day as a PhD researcher. I'm looking for people who know more than me to learn from their mistake or from what was good about what they've done. I move over to you, Martina, for the same kind of question.
Thank you. And I would love to build on what Gavan actually said. I completely agree. And Accenture does work with a couple of accelerators. So we have been working in the past few years with Unreasonable Impact. They're based in the US, but basically it's Unreasonable. They do this. They help growth stage ventures to scale. And in the past few years, since 2016, they've been partnering up with Barclays, that of course provides a kind of financial support to actually help them scale even more. And so not only they do provide the network, so connect entrepreneurs between each other, provide mentorship, and again, Accenture supports them in the capability of, mentorship and tutoring for this growth stage ventures. But it's something that they have done that I would love to see more, because I think it's amazing. It's during COVID, Unreasonable and Barclays, they decided to put up a small grants for all the entrepreneurs that were part of their cohorts, either in the past or in the present. So even going back to probably startups that have been out for a bit longer. So they already know what's, their game, and they know how to navigate the ecosystem. They put up a small grant for collaboration. So it was COVID. There were in a lot of places around the world, they're global. In a lot of places around the world, there was need for bringing relief and support on communities, to communities on the ground. So they were like, we're going to give you a pot of money if you apply together to combine, your efforts and deliver something new, like in the next 6 months. And what happened is you saw startups that were still navigating and trying to find their way in, actually getting together and do amazing things, because they saw that, and from those collaborations, they not only grow their networks, exchange knowledge, but I also find gaps in the markets that they, like, I remember there was one of in EV charging vehicles, of course, electric vehicles. I think it was in India, and they partner up with a EV solar powered startup. So they were like, they were working in the same kind of space, but they were more kind of in a competitive, let's say, mindsets rather than in a cooperative one. But as soon as a bit of money, it really wasn't a lot of money, but as soon as a bit of money was there, they were like, you know what, we can actually get together and, combine our ideas and see what happens, and take it as a very experimental kind of prototyping way. And so I think that, the next step, it's having a network so that people, but it's also having a network for potential collaborations. And so I think that accelerators could actually enable that in new ways. So maybe.
Thank you, Martina. And I join as well. And I must underline what you said, the power of collaborations. It's very important, not only for accelerators, but I'd say in most aspects of our life. And you can see this report was made possible by collaboration with different entities, different universities. So I will move on to what I think is going to be the last questions because we want to let people off by the time we promised. And so the last question is, if we shift a bit on another topic. So you saw from the results from the report we presented, we have a whole section dedicated to those incubators and accelerators aimed at creating what we call social or environmental impact. So about that, and I start again with you, David, what do you think is the impact of incubators and accelerators when it comes to solving these big societal challenges we're hearing more and more about nowadays, that we're all facing and trying to find a solution for? So what's the role that incubators and accelerators can play in these regards?
Yeah, like if I could broaden it ever so slightly in terms of incubators and accelerators are typically dealing with startups. I think, as Martina has said, like that's where the challenge comes from, or that's where the idea pollinates from, in terms of I spot an opportunity, or there's a challenge, or something I don't like, or something that's not going well, and that's where I build or cultivate the idea that I have, and eventually build a startup to service that market. So like I think that's where the opportunity is, just in its very practical sense. I see Annabelle Conway is on there, so I'll give a shout out to her as well, because she operates in that space as well. Like it's that opportunity. I think I'd love to see more collaboration in terms of people that have those issues. So maybe governmental bodies are coming in with challenges that they may have and sharing, not necessarily data, but they're sharing the practical day-to-day challenges that they have. And startups are maybe looking at that to service that market. Okay, there's obviously issues if it's successful in terms of procurement and tendering around that post developing an ideal solution, but that's the opportunity that I would see. And around that social innovation, entrepreneurship, CSR piece, all of that kind of umbrella. And obviously it's multifaceted within that, but that's where I'd see the opportunity, that there's that almost that sharing of, look, here's what we have the problem with. Can you come or is there something that you can do with your agile ability to turn on a sixpence in terms of that startup mindset mentality that you have to service something for us? That's where I would see and look, that's probably a maturing of the market more, where people that have these challenges are realizing, and that's ultimately why this is super successful for me, in terms of having that reference point of all of the accelerators that are out there, but then being able to show, look, if you have a challenge with something and you want students to solve it, you need to talk to Gavan. Or if it's, and maybe that's where we solve that problem that you mentioned earlier, or if it's something to do with financial tech, we actually have a lot of those companies based in wherever. Or if it's a clustering problem to do with medical devices that you're looking at Galway or wherever it may be, that's probably the maturing. And it's probably actually where somebody's spotting an opportunity and saying, you know what, there's something to be done here. And it's maybe, it's not that entrepreneurial piece, but it's somebody that's keen and willing and sees that there's a gap there and they can service it.
Totally agree with that, David. And again, we were talking about that before, about collaboration and joining forces for the same kind of going in the same direction all together and leverage what every one of us has to offer. Gavan, I will go over to you.
Yeah, I take a slightly different sort of perspective on this as well, because in the reports, and probably not intentionally, but it almost portrays sort of the social and environmental startups as being maybe not commercial and sort of and slightly sort of different. Climate, the climate challenge is a global challenge, and that presents commercial opportunities, for startups, because it's impacting sort of countries sort of globally. So we ran 3 programs last year. These are not student startups, EU funded programs, and we had 63 startups from around Europe sort of participating on some really, really deep tech, really interesting sort of startups. So I think you have to approach it that yes, the society impact is very sort of different, but there's still commercial sort of opportunities. And you take another challenge is like homelessness and the housing crisis. Absolutely, that has to be addressed as a matter of urgency as well. But there are startups that are looking at tackling those problems, like retrofitting of buildings, or sort of modular homes, new process. Again, there's a commercial benefit to the startup, even though it's tackling a society sort of problem, and I don't think it should be sort of treated any differently.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and as well, the financial part of it is always a driver for anyone to do anything. If there's money involved, of course, people are more motivated to do it. Martina, I'll go over to you.
Yes, I will be very quick. Totally, I can attest myself. We're really seeing, even in the big corporations, a shift towards social impact and social value, much more. Regulation are driven this, partially reporting. And this is something I think there is something that I see struggling when it comes to social environmental impact is actually measuring it, right? It's easier to measure financial return. It's harder to measure social impact. Environmental impact, we have more data, but when it comes to social, like homelessness, right? Measuring your success, it's not something it takes time. There isn't clarity around reporting. There is a clarity around metrics. There are harmonizations efforts, but they're not there. So I think that's something that we need to be able to do. And, accelerators, incubators, they need to be able to guide the entrepreneurs in actually finding a way to measure social impact in a way that, that can prove the value of doing this, besides the financial and the profit. So that's all.
That's very interesting, Martina, and I'm sure I'll talk to you again because that's one of the focus that I have for my PhD. So I know very well what you're talking about there. Looking at the time, I think we are done because we don't want to all people past their work time. David, I know you're in the US, so you're just starting the day there almost. So again, just a quick final remark. It was a great pleasure on my side to